So there are a few DEP folks in the room, and I'd like to just introduce who they are. We're not going to go around. You just met Stephanie Mora, Division Director for Wetlands and Waterways. Also in the room is Chrissy Hops. Chrissy is the Assistant Director for the Waterways Program. Pam Harvey is here with us. Pam Harvey is a longtime technical expert for the department, and we're thrilled she's here. Susan Yu is a Waterways reviewer for the Waterways team. There may be other Chapter 91 folks in the room, but these are the folks participating in this session today. Please excuse if this is maybe some overlap with what Stephanie had to say. I have several slides to present. At the end of that, we'll have question and answers, and I'll discuss the schedule. During the presentation, if you're looking for a clarification type question, we suggest you put that in the chat. If you'd like to ask a question during the question and answer portion of today, we ask that you raise your hand. Apparently this updated version of Zoom keeps tracks of who raised their question in what order. So we're going to attempt to go in order. We may aggregate questions if that's appropriate. So once again, we're being recorded. And if you don't want to be recorded, I encourage you to turn off your camera. So thank you again for everyone for joining. This is, as discussed already, this is a public information session. This is not a public hearing. There will be hearings next week on the 25th. The purpose of today is to really provide an opportunity to learn more about what changes the department is proposing to the 91 regulations. We're very interested in what you have to say. We're very interested in your thoughts, your comments, your questions. And we hope that you will not just engage today, but submit written comments during the public comment period, which ends on March 1st. Later in this slide, this brief slideshow will provide you with the email address where you can send those. That information is also contained in the public notice, and all of that is on DEP's website. And if you, rather than typing out the address here, if you search DEP comment opportunities, look for Waterways, you'll easily get to the proposed revisions to the regulations. So let's see. Here we go. Next slide. Excellent. So far, so good. So this is just a brief agenda for today. I've got 14 slides in total. You've already seen 2. After that, we'll take questions and answers. We'll take questions to the extent that we're able to answer them today. We will. Fair warning: if we're not able to answer the question today, we're not going to make it up. We may want to defer to think about the question and answer it later. And part and parcel with that is it's critically important that folks submit written comments so that we get those comments get full consideration, and the department will be preparing a written response to comments, to all of the comments received during this reg promulgation process. I promise not to read every word on a slide like this. I think the fact that you are all here, you have an understanding of the importance of dealing with the resiliency challenges that are before us. We could spend a whole day talking about what those challenges are. There are challenges that very specifically address Chapter 91, the statute, the regulations, licensing, permitting, public rights, public access. There are many, many places where it touches on the 91 program. Here are just a couple of data points that we might consider. So that's why we're here, to address some of the challenges of climate change. This is Resiliency 1.0. This is the department's first update to the waterways, proposed update to the waterways regulations to specifically address climate change. We address not merely the challenges are not merely on the coast, but rather inland as well. And the changes that we're proposing through this package address some coastal and some inland challenges. The biggest change, the most important change, I think, that we're making here in these set is that we're changing the requirement that projects subject to licensing presently have to consider historical sea level rise, and not even all projects, non-water dependent use projects must consider historical sea level rise. And the change that we're making here is that we have to consider projected sea level rise. It's the biggest, probably the most important thing we're doing today. There are some changes with how building, how projects interact with the floodplain. There are building considerations you can see here. And lastly, another very important piece is that we're addressing some of the work that happens in non-tidal rivers and streams, which, as you know, are jurisdictional under Chapter 91 if they're navigable and public funds have been expended within those for various reasons. I'm going to go through a series of slides that identify in bullet form really what the changes are. First, we've updated several definitions. We've updated these definitions to bring the 91 regulations into a spot that's consistent with the wetlands proposed changes to the wetland regulations that address sea level rise, climate change, land subject to storm flowage, the present set, the wetlands resilience 1.0 proposed regulations. You can see here we've added several definitions, and we've deleted definition of coastal high hazard. We've deleted coastal high hazard because it's a little bit of an ambiguous term. We're decided to use the more precise terms that are listed above. Some of those items, while they may not have a direct application in Chapter 91 regulations, they are included in some of the definitions include other terms. So rather than leave them undefined, we've included all of those definitions. As I said, going forward, as we propose, any application for a license, whether that's a renewal, a simplified, non-water dependent, water dependent, et cetera, they must consider projected sea level rise. This slide identifies a couple of places where those changes have been made, and those changes are presented in the red line version of the proposed regulations, which are on our website. One of the questions that we wrestled with was, what's the standard? What should we reference? How should we tell an applicant in the regulations, you have to consider sea level rise. Where does that data come from? Whose study should you use? And where we are presently, what we're proposing is that these applications consider the most recent mapping, the most recent estimates as presented on resilientmass.gov. The reason for that is, as soon as we define standard, that standard will change. The only thing we know about, one of the most important things we know about projected sea level rise, projected climate change, is that sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And as soon as we set a standard, we fear that that standard would change. So by referencing Resilient Mass, that provides us an opportunity to have a central location that's readily accessible where the best information can be referenced. You will notice, if you look at the red line, that the change we're proposing to the regulation allows the department to consider other relevant current information. Paraphrasing the language a little bit. As the science moves forward, as we learn more about what's happening, what's going to happen, and as we learn, as we live it, we start to live it, the science will change, the knowledge will change, the best practices will change. And it's the department's intention to have this change allow for consideration of those future improvements in our knowledge, experience, et cetera. So that's why we're referring to resilient mass. As I said, there are a couple of places where we add specific provisions that indicate that an applicant must consider projected sea level rise. One of the places we've added here is under extended term licenses, 915. Any license greater than 30 years must consider projected sea level rise. And an important part is how do the public benefits continue to be provided during that time. We've made some changes, as you can see, to the engineering and construction standards. These changes are, as you know, as you can see here, these changes were made to bring the 91 regulations a little bit closer to the FEMA standards with regard to definitions, et cetera. Here's the reference, another reference to similar reliable sources. This is an interesting one that we hope is helpful for non-water dependent use projects. The top one here, conservation capacity for water dependent use. As you all know, there are height limitations, height setback requirements. It's very important to us that we encourage the opportunity, provide an opportunity and encourage the relocation of building utilities, switchgear, what have you, from basements and ground floors to areas that are safer up on the roof. What we've done is the change we're making is that we're indicating that if you need to put utilities on the roof, relocate existing utilities from basement or ground floor, what have you, to the roof. And if you need to enclose those utilities, that enclosure will not count against the building for height. So that if the change is merely to move the switchgear, for example, to the roof and put it in an enclosure, the regulations will not require an amendment for that change in height. We will not consider that to be a change in height. Now, presently, you could put utilities on the roof now under the current regulations, and that wouldn't be a change in height. We're trying to avoid a conflict with any local zoning that may define height in different ways. Lastly, the second item on this slide, we're seeking to clarify the limits of a project that may be presently exempt within non-tidal rivers and streams. This is pointed directly at culvert replacements. The Commonwealth is expending considerable effort, both technically and with funding, to encourage municipalities to replace undersized culverts. Sometimes those projects are exempt from 91 because the culvert may be too small that it's not navigable. That's great. We want to hear about it. We confirm that exemption if it's a existing public service project that otherwise complies with the regulations.
Daniel, pardon me one second. I had a message from one or two participants who said that your audio was breaking up a little. It's clear for me. He's coming through loud and clear. If anybody else is having trouble hearing Daniel, please let me know in the chat, but otherwise, we're going to assume it's on the attendee end, since all of us here on the DEP team are hearing him loud and clear. Yep, and most folks are saying it's loud and clear. So our apologies for those for whom it's breaking up. If you want to, feel free to log out and log back in, and we'll make sure to keep an eye on the waiting room. All right. Thanks, Daniel. Sorry for the interruption.
You're welcome. Anyone who knows me knows that loud enough is not usually a problem, but certainly want to fix any problems that might happen with the technology. So just to summarize that last item, we're we're trying to facilitate, by that, we're trying to facilitate a culvert replacement, projects that are already reviewed fairly robustly, and they're already exempt from Chapter 91 because that many times they're exempt because the culvert renders that very short section of the stream, navigable river stream, not navigable. And it's what we're trying to do here is allow for the appurtenance, the construction and appurtenances that have to happen in order to affect that replacement. And I will apologize for an odd cultural reference. You can't just beam that, this isn't Star Trek. You can't just beam that culvert out and beam the new one in. You have to actually construct it. And that very often, nearly always, requires work upstream and downstream of the culvert. And provided that work is adjacent and appurtenant to the department, this change is intended to allow that very small amount of work to happen within this existing exemption. That is a mercifully short number of slides for a very important topic. What you see in front of you is a schedule coming up. We have another public information session this evening. Public hearings next week on the 25th. Please submit written comments by March 1st. One more slide. Please submit them to dep.waterways@mass.gov. Very important that they be sent in that manner. Please put in the subject line, Waterways Resilience Comments. The Waterways email, that's our programmatic email. We get many emails every single day. And it's very important that we hear your comments, that we see your comments, that we're able to be thoughtful and respond to them as we go through this process of right promulgation. It's really important to put that there. We're going to look, but to be certain that your comments get heard, please put that subject line. That is our brief 14-slide presentation. I'm going to stop sharing now and let's see if we can't hear from some folks.
All right. I see Jen Murphy has a raised hand. So Jen.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having this, this forum. I think it's a great way for people to get the information. So can you speak a little bit to the impact on residential building projects that might be impacted by these proposed changes, and specifically what the changes would be? If there's a difference depending on what zone you're in.
And pardon me, I made a facilitator gaffe. When you speak, can you please identify your affiliation? Sorry about that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Jen Murphy. I'm a Hingham resident. Thanks.
Thank you, Jen. The changes are that that any project, so a residential project would be a non-water dependent use project, so that such a project would already need to consider the location in floodplains. So this is the only change really would be that that you must consider the effects of sea level rise. And when I say consider the effects of sea level rise, it doesn't mean that that a project must be built to withstand what's going to happen in 2100, how far out. But rather the life of the structure. Now, that will very likely mean whatever we know now as far as sea level rise have to be taken into consideration for the home. If you're building it in a floodplain, you're going to need to comport with not just the FEMA regulations, but Wetlands Protection Act regulations. And the department, in considering the application, will consider how that project has been built with regard to projected sea level rise. And I will give as an example, under our present regulations, we licensed a 4 or 5 condo project recently in Boston, and they asked for an extended term, and the project team was only able to presently, or willing to, design the project to go to the 2070 standard. And we issued a license that was valid for 48 years, not the 85 that they asked for. So to answer your question, try to get back to that. Building a new residential building, you have to consider the effects of sea level rise. Is it raised up? Is it on piles, et cetera? As might be required by the other regulations, so that it is a suitable use of the property for that period of time. So Stephanie, I'm going to rely on you to call
Yep.
on folks, unless Tom is the only person with his hand up, in which case
Yes,
I will
and,
call on
sorry,
Tom.
I was doing the classic muted thing. Yes, next up is Tom Ready.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hey, Daniel.
Excellent.
Tom
Excellent.
Reddy from South Boston. I put the question in the chat, but I'll ask here as well. So what agency is going to be used to kind of set the projected flood levels and or elevations? And probably equally as important, where other agencies, city and or state, have already declared what the projection flood levels are to be used in projects. If there is a conflict, how is that going to be resolved? Thank you.
I think, as you correctly point out, the proposed change in regulation points applicants to Resilient Mass. It does allow for other data to be considered, other current reliable information. I guess I don't have an answer to that, a specific answer to that. The department will consider the information presented by this, standards set by the state with Resilient Mass, and we'll also consider any local information. For instance, I know you're in Boston, so if Boston were to do a new study, publish a new study that conflicts and presents a more vulnerable or higher water elevations in Resilient Mass, the department will consider that as well, and we will have to make a determination as to which should be used and which is more suitable for the life of the structure. If the structure is a dock, that's one thing. If the structure is a large mixed-use building, there's a lot to be considered there as to whether or not it is adequately considered climate change, sea level rise.
Thank you, Dan.
And I suspect that kind of question is going to be common to many commenters. So please, by all means, include that question or comment in your public comments. All right, we have 2 lined up next, Julie Eaton Ernst and then Heidi Ritchie. So Julie first.
Hi, thank you guys for the presentation and this forum to be able to ask questions. My name is Julie Eaton Ernst. I'm the Climate Resilience Practice Leader at HNTB. I had a question regarding some terminology. So on page 3, there was a definition for the primary frontal dune, where there were the terms relatively steep and relatively mild. And I was wondering if you could provide some clarification on, is there a specific slope inclination, or is it the agency that will define what relatively means for the project, and potentially therefore the inland limit and velocity zone? And then a sort of a follow-up question, if velocity zone is determined by the primary frontal dune, what would be considered the high water mark?
I would be happy to answer the last part of that. And Stephanie, I would like to defer the wetlands related question to you regarding dune. So I'll say 2 things. First is the Waterways program, we're not changing the definition of mean high water. The limit of Chapter 91 jurisdiction in tidal waters, there are 2. Well, there are several. Mean high water, current mean high water, that is the limit Seaward of that is flow tidelands. If there is evidence of fill, the mean high water mark landward of that would be fill tidelands up to the historic high water mark. So mean high water is based on what's out there today. In whether it's a dune or whether it's a bulkhead or whether it's a nice gently sloping beach, that is mean high water. That doesn't change. And the department is always willing to accept survey data that indicates where is mean high water. We require reference to NOAA tidal gauging stations, and then so the best way is you get your NOAA data, and then if you have a cross-section survey of the beach, that's how you can decide where that line actually is. The elevation is not something that is observed. It's not a rack line. It's not a wet sand line. It does come from National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. So the high water mark would not change by anything we're doing. The second thing I'll say is that you will only find primary frontal dune in the waterways regulations twice. Once is its definition, and once is within one of the other FEMA related definitions. So as I said earlier, we got rid of coastal high hazard and using velocity zones, AE zones, A zone, AE zone, et cetera, in the regulations instead. The reason for that is to be more precise and to be more consistent with both the wetlands regulations and the FEMA regulations. And those definitions include other terms, and we chose not to be silent on those, but rather provide those definitions as well.
To your question, Julie, about the inland limit of the B zone. So the demarcation among the coastal floodplain B zone or LSCSF, the MOA zone, moderate wave action, and the MEWA zone, the minimum wave action. And I'm going to rely on Pam to double check me on this, Pam Harvey, but those are based off the FEMA data and FEMA maps in this set of regulations. Pam, did you want to expound on that?
Yes, that's correct. And for more information, it would be determined through the wetlands burning process. And for more information on this, CEM has a helpful publication about interpreting the FEMA maps. They will show the V zone on that, and they have a good explanation there on how the primary frontal dune is determined.
I got in trouble once trying to find the primary frontal dune, and I'm still trying to live that down. So I'm not going to be defining such terms.
All right. Thank you, Julie. Next up is Heidi Ritchie.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank Dan and Stephanie and all of the staff at DEP for all of this effort. It's so important that we update regulations to address climate resiliency. And I particularly appreciate in this set of regulations, looking forward to the future sea level. My question relates to, you're doing this exemption for replacement of existing culverts and non-tidal waters. There are a tremendous number of ditches and embankments that were installed historically, thinking particularly in salt marshes, that were never permitted or licensed in any way. And just wondering if you've considered or might consider for future regulatory changes, clarifying the status of those in regards to these regulations, because there are many practitioners out there who are attempting to heal those past unpermitted alterations, and could we look at those as well, existing conditions and restoring what should be there naturally, just as you're looking at culverts, like replacing a culvert under the stream flow standards, shouldn't we also be looking at, I don't know, to me, it's odd that a ditch that was installed that was never permitted or licensed is that treated the very same way as any other structure. under the regs? Is my question.
Heidi, just one quick clarification.
Yeah.
Help us understand so we can better understand your question, specific to the chapter 91 regs.
Yeah, so what, so under chapter 91 for some of these projects, they, putting salt marsh hay in a ditch in order to heal it is considered fill and requires a license. And yet that ditch itself never had a license to begin with. It's just restoring with the natural material that's already there on the marsh. So, I know you're not taking comments now, so I don't expect a response to something you haven't written, but I was just thinking of it in relation to these other exemptions, and if there's any possibility to even just clarify those things in the regulations, what's jurisdictional and what's not,
Okay.
or what is required.
Let me take just a first quick crack at that, to note that, Heidi, you're quite correct that this chapter 91 regulatory package as currently proposed doesn't address that, but as we continue to scope out with stakeholder input what would be in the, if you will, resilience 2.0 for chapter 91, that is a topic that that folks have raised, including your organization, and we will look at it. But Daniel, defer to you for a more detailed response if you want to confirm how the current regs address it.
Sure, I'll just a little bit. So with regard to culverts that may not have been licensed back in the day, yes, there are numerous of them. In many cases, those culverts, while they're not licensed, their continued use and operation is permitted as an existing public service project, if provided there's been no change in use since January 1, 1984. So I don't want to say that they're exempt from licensing, but their continued operation is permitted without a license as part of 905(3)(c), I think it is. I can't do that with all the regs, but that one I can do. With regard, so if someone needed, if there was a proposal to replace that, such a culvert, the department would look at that as would any other. It would be essentially assumed to be approved as an existing public service project. And if the changes were proposed to it and those changes were, if they were eligible for a minor project modification, we would approve that. And if not, had to go to a license, then it would be a license required. We're not changing any of those standards at this time. And with regard to the salt marsh haygrass being placed in ditches for salt marsh alteration, this is a topic that is of quite some interest to the department. That we have collectively spent many hours teasing out how such projects are regulated. Under the current waterways regulations, fill is defined as an unconsolidated material intended to remain in place, and it is naturally occurring. So is rock. So it is. I don't mean to be flippant. I would love to see some of those artificial ditches be restored. I really would. Presently, that's considered fill. And as part of Resiliency 2.0, we need to look very closely at how we might facilitate those projects in a very careful way so that we don't lose some of the other very, very important protections that the regulations provide.
Understood. And so for Stephanie, you are inviting comments here on what suggestions for 2.0 as well as on what.
Yeah, we would be delighted if in the whatever form your comment, email or letter takes, commenting on the proposed revisions that are before us, these draft revisions. But if you have further suggestions or comments on what you would like to see in the next bite at the apple, please include those. Thank you for raising that, Heidi.
Thank you.
I want to echo what Stephanie said. There are substantial challenges in front of the Commonwealth and in front of property owners, regulators, developers, everybody. The Waterways program would be thrilled to accept thoughtful suggestions from anyone. There have been a lot of reports done. There's been a lot of effort put in. It is our current effort to be certain that we capture that as part of our 2.0 effort. As things change, as things evolve, as new ideas come along, as new studies, please do not hesitate to send them to us.
All right, thank you. So we've got two lined up in the queue. We've got Beth Gurney first, followed by John Walkie. So Beth, and please don't, a reminder to let us know your affiliation. That's just helpful. Thank you.
Okay, hi, this is Beth Gurney. I work at the Woods Hole Group. I apologize, I do not have a camera at home, so I can't turn it on. I have a little bit of a cold, but my question is involving the renewal of licenses. And so it says that a renewal can be issued if it conforms with the previously approved application, but taking into account, I guess, the new regulations and existing conditions. So does that mean that if we apply for a renewal, but now let's say it's for a pier and now the pier is too low in the water, would we have to apply for, do we apply for the renewal just with some updated plans, or does it become a new license? If
Thank
it's, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for the question. A couple of clarifying points. When an application for renewal is really not very different from an application for a new license. The department will, you don't, if you, for instance, if you got your first license in 1972, 78, what have you, and now you're applying for renewal, the department will consider the current regulations as part of that licensing process. We are limited, if one calls it renewal, we're limited in the term that may not exceed the original term, but we will be looking at compliance with the regulations as they currently exist. And that includes sea level rise, after these regs hopefully get finalized. I think it's important to note that one should consider the life of the structure. If we're presently looking at, if you want to consider a 2070 horizon for what we are projecting, what our solid projection, obviously there was, I apologize if there's another one more recent. That's 47 years from now, 46 years from now, something like that. If you're installing a small residential dock, that dock's not, the life of the span of that dock is not going to be 47 years. So the department will require you to consider how sea level rise will affect that. Floating docks will rise and fall with the tide. So not a substantial issue. If you've got a pier, then we will ask you, what is the intended lifespan of the pier? And we will ask either that it is of a robust enough construct, for example, is of a robust enough construction to withstand that, the wave and forces, or that it be designed in such a way that there's flexibility that the deck of that pier might be raised. I am not an engineer. I know what I just said is not an easy task to design or effect, but that it would be an option. We all presently, specifically, Tom will remember this in some work in the 4-Point Channel, we routinely ask the designers, engineers, the proponents for mixed-use projects, how will this project be flexible in the future to provide additional protection for additional sea level rise that we don't foresee at the moment? How is the project been designed to provide that additional flexibility? And we don't stop asking until we get the answer is yes. So that you have to think about the life of the structure.
Okay, so maybe a follow-up question is, if you have an existing pier and you want to renew the license, but then let's just say it really should be raised up, and you give it a new license and it shows the design is, say, a little higher, then is the applicant required to raise the pier now to meet the new plans that have just been approved? Or do they have a certain amount of time in which they can do that work?
Let me see if I understand it. So for instance, it's probably a 30-year license, seeking a renewal to that 30-year license. And within that 30 years, it seems evident that the deck should have a higher elevation in order to stay out of that flood zone. Would your client, would the applicant need to effect that change immediately? Or could that change happen in the future, say 10 years out? Is that the question?
Something like that, yeah. Like, are they required to then change it to match the new license plans that have been approved?
When we approve a license, it has a 5-year, you have 5 years to complete construction. And extensions to that are requested all the time. And the department routinely grants such requests for an extension. We're allowed to, by statute, we're limited to 5 years, but then also by statute, we're allowed 1-year extensions for reasonable request. And the department does not generally withhold approval of that reasonable request to extend. So at a minimum, you'd have 5 years to make the change. And if you need to go a little further, you can continue to ask for 1-year extensions.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Perfect. All right, we have 2 hands raised, and then in between those two, a question in the chat that I think has been answered, but we might as well shine some light at. So next up is John Walkie. Then we're going to go to a chat question from Sarah McCammon, and then back to Cole Bateman. So John Walkie next.
Thank you. John Walker with Green Roots, East Boston resident. And I think you may have addressed some of this in the last answer, but I was just curious in terms of defining the life of a structure or a facility or whatever it is that's asking for a license. How do you figure that out as we look, and if we're looking at, and no doubt the goalposts are going to be moving on us, and Resilient Mass will have new 70-year forecasts and whatnot, and the scenario will keep changing. But the building that's being built will not. It'll be there. So knowing that, how if someone's building a residential, a single family house, or a large block of condos or whatever, are you making an estimate that this is a building is expected to be around for 70 years, 100 years? It's Boston. We've got some buildings that are very old. Stuff that's going up now doesn't look like it's going to last 20 years, let alone 100. So the question is, how do you gauge the lifespan of the facility in question?
Thank you for the question. The Waterways program we do not employ any architects on our team, and we don't have any plans to add any architects. The program routinely relies upon representation made by the Massachusetts Registered Professional Engineer for the project. There is at least one instance in the regulations where, for instance, for an extended term, we're allowed to we have the discretion to issue an extended term license in consideration of several things. One is the anticipated lifespan of the building. And we rely upon the applicant to make a credible presentation as to the lifespan of the structure, whether that structure be a building or a dock or what have you. I would
add to that and just note that that is one of a number of $64,000 questions. And so also looking forward to our next, bite at the apple, we're looking at options to, similar to, say, a municipal harbor plan, what would a resiliency plan look like for a particular proposed project, so that an applicant could demonstrate that while their structure, is currently resilient up to X year of projected sea level rise, that there is sufficient, I don't know, I'm just going to use the word wiggle room, sufficient margins that would allow further design changes going forward. And so that's just a conceptual approach, obviously not ready to be put into regulatory language, but that's one thought about the future.
I am reminded, when I know, the anecdotally, when you ask an architect or an engineer or a contractor, can I do this? Can you do this? Very frequently, the answer is, how much do you want to spend? And I mean this with no flippancy, no disrespect. There are significant challenges ahead of us. If I were building a very expensive home on the shoreline, I would consider how, without even the regulations, how do my kids, and when I leave this to my kids, how do we protect against the rising seas? And that, there are going to be methods, and there are going to be devices, there are going to be ways to protect against these challenges that we have not yet invented.
All right, we're going to take a detour into the chat. And I think it's been asked and answered, but just so people might not be paying attention to the chat. Sarah McCammond asked, on the height modification, is that only for water dependent projects? And Chrissy Hops from our team kindly put an answer in there, which is that the proposed height regs that we're talking about are in the section of the regs, which is 9.51, that applies only to non-water dependent use projects. So I don't know if Chrissy or Daniel want to clarify that, or if that is asked and answered.
Chrissy, you want to follow that up? Thank you.
Sure. Sarah, I didn't know if you had more of a, more of a question, or if that addresses what you were asking. Can't find her.
No, thank you, Chrissy. That answered my question. I was a little confused, and I may have just read the slide incorrectly. I thought it said water dependent at the title of that slide, and then I thought I heard Daniel say non-water dependent. So I just wanted to clarify. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you. All right, we have Cole Bateman with a hand raised.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Cole Bateman. I'm an engineer down here on Cape Cod. So we're dealing with water dependent, non-water dependent structures all the time. And Chrissy, thanks again for the comments the other day. One of the items that we're finding on a lot of our projects is existing structures that are not licensed. And particularly it's with the developing GIS mapping of mean low water and all the more available maps that are now identifying structures that might not have thought to been not licensed and now require licensure. Would this trigger coastal resiliency implications on buildings outside of those requirements that are already in building codes? For instance, if a structure is now, with the more recent maps developed, shown beyond the historic mean high water seaward of it, could that structure, if going through a licensing process, be forced to be raised for other reasons than, for instance, the 50% substantial improvement regulations within the building code?
Let me see if I understand your question. If an existing building is determined to be within filled tidelands and requires a license, and doesn't have an AMC license yet, but is seeking one modification, what have you. Will the Waterways program require, through these regulations, require that building to be raised in order to comply with FEMA or Wetlands Protection Act, right, et cetera?
Correct.
So if you're, I guess this may be two different scenarios. One is you're modifying a building, and if that building is located within an area subject to the Wetlands Protection Act, then that project will need to file a notice of intent and get an order of conditions. And there are very specific requirements, which we're not prepared to go through into here. There are other sessions. Then the project would need to comply with those, whether it's exceeds the 50% rule or it's just merely land subject to coastal storm flowage. Though I'm afraid I'm not able to answer whether that going through the Wetlands Protection Act piece will require raising it. It may. There are others on the call who might be able to opine on that. With regard to Chapter 91, the proposed regulation is that the application consider the potential effects of sea level rise. And if that building is going to be inundated within 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, I don't know, that creates a difficult situation. I'm not sure we can answer that question at the moment. I think I encourage you to put that in writing and figure that out, have to figure that out. And some of that will very likely be in Resiliency 2.0. So we're not really addressing that here.
All right. Miraculously, there are no more hands raised. There is one. Stephen Lecco asked a question about the schedule. We reposted or pasted, sorry, in the chat our expected schedule for moving forward with the draft, close of public comment period, and then preparing final regs and expected promulgation or enactment. Sorry. And so that's in the chat. Heidi Ritchie asked in the chat, basically, what can you tell us about time frame for and process for developing the 2.0 regs, both for Chapter 91 waterways and for wetlands? So Heidi, thank you for that question. And I mean, I think the safest thing to say at this point is that the process will include stakeholder input on the wetland side of the house. We will likely reconstitute some combination of the advisory committees that informed 1.0 on the coastal floodplain LSCSF side and the stormwater side, so that we have some regular input and feedback on the development process of 2.0, as well as public information sessions along the way. Similarly, on the Chapter 91 waterways side, we expect that we would stand up an advisory committee again that would be able to sort of be a touchstone for feedback as we develop that set of regs. So that speaks to process. We want to make sure that we're not doing this in a vacuum, obviously. If anything, we'll probably err on the side of too much engagement. You guys may get sick of us. And then as far as the timing goes, as fast as we can move. And I don't know if it's safe for me to say anything more definitive than that.
You're being recorded, Stephanie.
Exactly. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah. This is an incredible, taking words out of Stephanie's more. We also have Kathy Baskin here, who's the Assistant Commissioner for Bureau of Water Resources. I know that I'll invite Kathy to say something if you'd like. You all need to know this is an incredibly important topic for the department, certainly for the administration, but for the department, the bureau, the division, and the program. We issue licenses all the time, not quite every day, but many. And some of those mixed use licenses, applicants ask for 99 years. Now, we don't issue licenses for 99 years anymore, but 65 years. That's a very long time. The responsibility to get this right is sitting on our shoulders. We get it, and we are spending the effort to figure out what to do next and how to address these challenges. And it is very important to me and to the program and everyone else from DEP here that we get any and all good input, solid, constructive, creative input from the public. I don't know everything. Chrissy, Hannah, none of these people know everything. We are relying on experts, left, right, and center, to provide input, feedback, suggestions, comments, etc.
Okay. I believe that we are nearly wrapped. That is, there's no more raised hands. There's a few other things in the chat that I believe people are planning to basically submit as part of their, sort of official public comments. So Daniel, maybe flash up on the screen just for one last look at the how to submit comments. And while you're doing that, we'll let folks know again, somebody asked at the beginning, we will be posting both the recording of this session and actually all four of the two public information sessions today and tonight, 2 public hearings next week, day and evening. All of those will be recorded and posted. For those of you who just can't get enough and want to review the material, and obviously not tongue-in-cheek, for those who were unable to make any of these and who want to review the information so that to help them prepare their organization's comments on this. So this will be posted, and the presentation itself will be posted shortly. I give us maybe 48 hours to get that done or so, but we will work to get that up on our website. Thought I bought enough time for Daniel to put that slide up, but don't worry.
Nope.
That's okay.
I can't find the control. Where's Alice Brown when I need her?
No worries. No worries. As I mentioned, the other public information session with the Q&A format is tonight. The 2 public hearings are next week.
25th. Public hearings on the 25th.
Yeah, there you go. And those are, the usual public hearing where people can provide oral or verbal comments and testimony. Again, still encouraging people to submit written comments. And the instructions for how to do that will be, they're in the public notice, and they will be included in this slide deck that will soon be posted. And the public comment period will be open for an extended period and until March 1. So without, okay, in that intervening time, no more raised hands. So I'll just say thank you so much to all of you for attending. This was an excellent crowd, and we appreciate your time and effort to give us questions and feedback. Daniel, any closing words?
No, thank you. Thank you all. We have 100 and some attendees, 102 at the moment. Thank you all for attending. Please stay with us on this. We have a lot of work to do, and you all can help us. And we welcome any and all comments, any and all suggestions. We're all in this together. So
All
And
right.
if I knew there was going to be 55 minutes left, I would have brought some historic maps to show.
I'm so glad you didn't. And so is everybody else. All right. That's a wrap. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you.